said, I and we are so thankful you're all here, every one of you. And it's not a light thing. This wedding, it's not just about me and my bride, but it's about our Creator and His people, and His people to come. And there's going to be a marriage supper, a great marriage supper. After, well, someone else will explain the details. But I'm going to just read about a particular wedding feast. This is in Luke 14. Before I read that one, just read one line that struck out to me too. This is Luke 14:13. But when you give a feast, invite the poor, the maimed, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed, because they cannot repay you. For you shall be repaid at the resurrection of the just. Right before that it said, when you give a dinner or supper, do not ask your friends or brothers, your relatives, or rich neighbors, lest they also invite you back and you be repaid. And it just really struck me, because when I came to our 12 church communities, I was lavished with hospitality that I could not hardly understand why. This total stranger, they just love me. But now I've been here for a little while, and I understand, because the love of God has been poured out on human beings, that all they want to do is pour it out on others, and it just goes on and on. So this is what, so I'll just read it now. This is Luke 14, verse 15. Now, what I just read, now when one of those who sat at the table with our Master Yeshua, that's Jesus, so that's the translation in Hebrew of his name. His real name is Yeshua. So when they sat at the table with him, when they heard these things, he said to him, blessed is he who shall eat bread in the kingdom of God. Then he said to him, a certain man gave a great, so this is our Master Yeshua speaking. A certain man gave a great supper and invited many, and sent his servant at supper time to say to those who were invited, come, for all things are now ready. I think this parable refers to a wedding too, not just any old supper. But they all with one accord began to make excuses. The first said to him, I have bought a piece of property, and I must go and see it. I ask you to have me excused from coming. And another said, I have bought 5 yoke of oxen, and I am going to test them. I ask you to have me excused. Still another said, I have married a wife, and therefore I cannot come. So that servant came and reported these things to his master. Then the master of the house, being angry, said to his servant, go out quickly into the streets and lanes of the city, the highways and the byways, and bring in here the poor, and the maimed, and the lame, and the blind. And the servant said, Master, it is done, as you commanded, and still there is room. Then the master said to his servant, go out into the highways and hedges, and compel them to come in, that my house may be filled. For I say to you, that none of those men who were invited shall taste my supper. There's going to be a day we're all being invited to live the life that our Creator gave us to live. And many are rejecting it, as you're going to see in a few minutes, it being portrayed. But you You didn't reject the call to this wedding. That's why there's something, I know it, there's something special about you. You're not just here for I know you're not just here for have a fun time, but to honor something that's good, marriage. And it's so wonderful that you're here. So anyways, yeah, I can't go on. I should stop. So my friend's going to tell you what's going on next.
Okay, so our wedding is going to begin with a little play, and we call it a pre-enactment. A reenactment is a portrayal of something that has already happened in the past. But this is a pre-enactment of something that is going to happen in the future. And it's what all of us have staked our whole lives upon. This is what we're persuaded by. And this is the reason we have yellow delis, and it's the reason we live the way we live, and it's the reason we invited all of you to come. And if you have questions about anything you see, we'd love to talk to you about it during the supper later. So our play begins with our king on his throne, and this is actually a window into heaven. There's actually a throne in heaven. I'm just going to read a couple different things. But in Revelation 3, talks about Yeshua, and it says, "He who overcomes, I will grant him to sit down with me on my throne, as I also overcame and sat down with my Father on his throne." So during the life of Yeshua, or Jesus, Yeshua, or he's called Jesus, but just for your sake, for this wedding, we'll be calling him Yeshua. He was a man, and he came to earth, and he suffered to overcome a lot of things. Everyone suffers. Everyone suffers to obey their conscience, or suffers because they don't listen to it. But he actually suffered for a different purpose altogether. He actually suffered to obey his Creator and completely give his life over as a sacrifice for the sins of the whole world. And because he did that, he actually wasn't able to be held by death. He actually was resurrected as a man, and he's actually in heaven. But there's an issue here, is he's alone. But what he did was so that there could be many, many others who live the same life that he lived and overcome in the same way that he overcame. And so there's a banner above his throne that says, this is a quote from Hebrews 10:13, and it says, "From that time onward, from the time he sat down on the throne onward, waiting till his enemies are made a footstool for his feet." This is a real verse in the real Bible. And it says he's waiting. It talks about Yeshua, he overcame, but he's actually waiting. What's he waiting for? He's a king, but he needs a kingdom. And he's a groom, but he needs a bride. And his bride, obviously. But he can't just have any bride. His bride has to be ready for him and him alone. And this is why it's been 2,000 years since the New Testament was written and nothing's happened in terms of the earth being turned over to the rightful creator. So you have Yeshua and you have an absent bride who's getting ready. And the way she's getting ready is she's learning how to overcome her enemies the same way he suffered and overcame his enemies. And so these enemies are not flesh and blood. It talks about in the scriptures that our enemies they're actually in the air. They're the things that cause us human beings to hate one another and be greedy and be immoral and not care how it affects someone else. And it's the kind of things that cause divorce and unwanted children, and you have a whole war, poverty, there's a whole list. You could talk about all the problems on earth, but they all start in the heart of man. And so there's an overcoming that needs to be done. So he's watching the earth, and he sees what's going on, and he sees the darkness, but he also sees his bride.
King! I just returned from the earth. It's just as you said 2,000 years ago. It's gotten horrible. There's wars. There's wars over petty things. There's wars over things people don't even need. There's greed, like I've never seen before. It's ugly, King. It's just like you warned us to beware of all forms of greed. They permeate the human heart.